Before the start of the regular season, Winnipeg is going to get a chance to flex its pipeline muscles. With the upcoming Prospect Showdown, who can we expect to see on this upcoming tournament in Montreal?
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are ramping up to the start of the NHL season. It is just a few weeks away, and as we start to really get closer and closer, obviously before then, there will be plenty of news updates and things, but more importantly, this is when you finally start getting some actual hockey. And, of course, we're going to start off with the Prospect Showdown, which will be occurring, I believe, in Montreal. And then we go into preseason, right? Who's going to be on the Prospect Showdown roster, though? The Jets actually have told us. They've given us the roster. They've let us know which of our young players have made the cut. And I think there are some interesting inclusions and exclusions. We'll chat about that. And I also want to chat a little bit about, youth expectations for the season. Because Winnipeg, while they may need to, in theory, really rely on the youth, we also know that the Jets have often been a very vet-heavy team. And I want to talk about a couple of different scenarios of how this year's squad might either use the youth or exclude them, which you know how I feel about that. You know where my thoughts are on not utilizing the talent that you have, but it is what it is. That will also kind of lead us into some big storylines for the season. How is this Jets team going to try and carry the torch of a President's Trophy winning team from last year? But first, let's chat about the Prospect Showdown. Before we did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com, and you can win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. If you want a little bit less of a gamble, though, obviously you might be watching the Jets prospects, and the stakes are pretty low here, right? The Prospect Showdown is just a cool little exhibition tournament. It's not exactly something that's super, super serious, but this is our first taste of Jets hockey in forever. We've all been kind of waiting for, I would say, the return of the Jets. And I know that there's been a modicum of skepticism this season. I think a lot of folks are in a little bit of a divided camp, right? This year is the 15th anniversary of the franchise, and I think a lot of people kind of feel a little bit, underwhelmed by where the team is at, the direction the summer has taken, and what we can expect to see out of this Jets team coming up this season. But I am trying to be more optimistic in some ways. I'm really excited about, at least on paper, some of the youth opportunities. I think that there's a real chance for some kids to potentially get their name on the Jets lineup at some point in the season. Now, how many of them will actually make that jump and how many of them will play more than a couple of games? That's really debatable, and I want to talk about that a little bit later. But for the Prospect Showcase and Showdown, this is obviously a really big chance for some of the youth players who have maybe been either in the juniors or just about starting their AHL careers to make an impression on the Jets brass. Show that you're really up to date, show that you're ready to go for maybe some pro minutes, and this could be a jumping off point for you to really start your pro career off on the right foot. Now, I'm not going to say that this is going to be a make or break scenario, and I think a lot of people sometimes look at youth tournaments with a little bit too much of a fine lens. I look at this more as kind of like a broad strokes impression sort of moment, right? You look at the roster, you look at what these kids do in this tournament, and it's not something that I would read too much into. But I will say the roster this year is interesting. The Jets are bringing Barlow, Chibrikov, the new draft pick Cloutier, Martin, Newman, Reggie Newman, Julian, Wagner, Walton, Yeager, Chase Yoder, and Zilkin for the forward group, which for the most part, there's a lot of familiar names. couple of relative newcomers. And then on the back end, you've got Engel, Salamonson, Seth Fryer, Sward, Reese Hamilton, Connor Walton, who's Kieran's brother. And of course, you saw Walton on the forward group, so that's kind of fun. Caleb Hartman and Zloty. And then on in net, you've got DiVincentis and Alex Worthington. So I would say quite a bit of what I would call the moose fodder, and then a couple of camp invitees, a couple of players who maybe, you're bringing in for an interesting look. First off, most notable exclusion, Brad Lambert. Lambert not being in this camp group is very interesting. There's two ways to look at this, right? Either the Jets are penciling him in for a potential roster spot already heading into the NHL season, and they feel like they know what he is, or they are perhaps thinking he's already destined for the Moose, and they're not really expecting much here. He might be dealing with some sort of an injury. Maybe they just feel like he's going to start the year off with the Moose, and they'll go from there. But the fact that he's not in this group, and Chibrikov is, a little bit interesting. Chibrikov, I wouldn't really call a prospect anymore. I know that that's maybe not the most accurate way to describe it, but Chibrikov's a veteran at this point. He's been in the pro leagues for a while, and yes, he absolutely is a prospect, but I think he's one of those guys where I might consider him a little more of a senior prospect in some ways. He's still very young, but I feel like at this point, the only jump for him really is to make the NHL. And so if the Jets continue to use him on the Moose, I just feel like he's already proven at that level what he can. What more does he need to do to get an NHL spot? And so for him to be in the Prospect Showdown roster is a little bit interesting. I can't say that I expected that. I thought he would have been the guy that had the inside track to the NHL spot, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe the Jets are looking at Lambert as the guy that's going to be the Ehlers stand-in, and they're just going to throw him into the deep end. If that's not what's happening, and maybe Lambert is either not performing up to the standards that they hope or has some sort of an injury, that invites a lot of other questions. An injury would also be interesting in some ways because last year, Lambert's shooting percentage was really, really low relative to what you would expect. He had 55 points and 21 goals the previous year, and it fell all the way down to 7 goals and 35-ish points this past year. So clearly something wasn't 100% with him compared to the previous season, and maybe this is a way to find out. In terms of the other forwards, I would keep a close eye on guys like Julian, maybe Wagner, and perhaps Walton. Now, Walton, I think, has a little bit further to go, but Julian and Wagner have some real potential to potentially get a call-up sometime in the next year or two. I think Julian would make sense as a fourth-line guy. Wagner could be an interesting bottom six player. Barlow is also in this mix, and I feel like I don't know what to expect with him, right? He had a really bad streak to start the season last year in the OHL, and then it started to round out after he got traded, but I don't really know what to read from him. He's got a great shot, and I feel like there are other parts of his game that haven't yet caught up, but maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe we just need to be patient, but I think that this is kind of getting to the point where, sort of in a similar vein with Lambert, I'm starting to feel like it's getting to be make or break with him, right? If he can't crack, a pro roster and really deliver the goods, you might wonder about his future with the Jets org. So we'll have to be patient with that. On defense, obviously, I think the main names, Engel and Salamonson, maybe a little bit of Zloty will be interesting to watch, but probably not as closely watched as really the forward group. I think the forward group is the one that most people are going to prioritize. Kevin He, Kieran Walton, some of the really exciting young prospects. Yeager, of course, is going to be in the mix. So, yeah, I think this prospect showcase is going to be very interesting. I think there's going to be some opportunities to make an impression. But the players who aren't in this group, I wonder, what is the plan for them? Are they more on the Moose track? Do the Jets potentially see an NHLer or two? We'll just have to wait and really see until we hit preseason coming up towards the end of this month. But curious to know how you feel about this roster. Are you excited about it? Are you not so anticipatory of the prospects? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Speaking of prospects, I want to talk about youth expectations because the Jets have two different ways that they might approach the season. One I would favor, and one I think is really making a retread of mistakes that we've seen from previous years. We'll dive into that coming right up, but before we do, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel helps you find some of the best Super Bowl chances. Maybe you think you know who this year's NFL champion is going to be. I'm going to vote for the Ravens. Maybe you think it's going to be the Eagles. I think that's a very fair pick. Right now, they're playing the Cowboys and have the lead, but we'll see how long that holds. Maybe you also want to pick your MVP player for the season. I will always vote Lamar, but Josh Allen, of course, won it last year. Maybe Barkley gets his due this season. We'll just have to wait and see. But the only way that you can get in on the action is to download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about the prospects. And, I've been in some debates on social media and in some comms channels about the Jets youth this year. And I've talked about this season to me being one that's potentially open for a transition season. But I think in our heart of hearts, we probably know that the Jets are going to lean more on the veterans this year. And if they do, I have some thoughts about that. The first thing is that leaning on veterans is fine for the regular season, but I feel like the Jets have really limited themselves when it comes to their playoff ceiling. Year after year, we have this thing where Winnipeg does pretty well in the regular season. They play a good forechecking, grindy style of hockey that lasts for 82 games. And then they get to the playoffs, and, once you start playing the same teams over and over again, and you start to have them adjust and really match up well against what Winnipeg can put out there, you really find that Winnipeg is a deeply flawed team. Every team in the NHL has some sort of a weakness, but I think the Jets in particular have had a couple of key offensive gaps that have held them back from being really dangerous in the postseason. This past year was the first time where we'd finally seen some positive progression in the playoffs. But I think if we're being 100% honest and truthful about how the whole postseason went, we know that the Jets were really lucky to make the second round. Had Perfetti not had that miracle moment off of a couple of flubbed passes and, a cross slot pass that found him, I don't think that we would be having the conversation that the Jets had a very good playoffs. They would not have. And I think if you look at what actually happened in last year's postseason, it's hard to also get super excited about 6 wins. It does include a series win, which is a really big change from previous years, but I feel like the expectations for the Jets were kind of high. And it's why I said the trade deadline was a huge disaster. Winnipeg really, didn't have much of a swing, and what they did swing for, I don't think really helped the team out enough to where you thought of them as like an elite contender. I thought that they were certainly in the mix, but I was hoping for like a big swing, or at least a couple of maybe middle to top 6 options that could be on the cheaper side and that would help supplement the Jets offense, especially with some of the matchup issues, but they just didn't get it done. And so I look at this summer and I haven't really seen a lot that moves the needle for me either, which then kind of brings me to this whole thing about, what the Jets are planning to do this year. Are they really going to try to compete with this roster? Do they really believe that this is the team to get it done? My interpretation is that if they do feel this is the team, I would not be great. I would not be on the same page there. I think offensively, this team definitely lacks some real teeth. The departures and who's replaced them don't really inspire the kind of confidence for an elite contender that I think a lot of teams elsewhere would be kind of feeling at this point. You look at the Panthers and certainly Florida is just a much more well-structured, deeper, more elite team. And when they supplement their already existing strong core, they bring in lots of big swings and quite a few top trade targets. And like the Jets don't have that same luxury, but I feel like Winnipeg just hasn't swung much at all in a way that supplements their depth with really good, 4-line matchup ability. And it's not like these lines are necessarily bad, but it's just when you compare them to top contenders, the Jets continue to fall behind the 8 ball. And this is where I really hoped, this year would be a season where you'd see more youth involvement. And, here's the thing, right? If the youth fail, I don't really feel upset about it. I will be sad in the moment, and I would say, obviously it'd be a huge disappointment, but it's one of those things where I'm not going to be upset about the outcome in each game so much as it is the broader trend. If the prospects don't make the jump, that's obviously disappointing in its own right. But Winnipeg hasn't really given themselves an opportunity to find out if any of these kids can help them actually build out a competitive team. They keep going back to the vet well, and I think in a lot of ways it helps them in the regular season, but when it comes to the playoffs, the vets just don't have enough juice. I think this team has gotten very far for what it is. I think Hellebuck and certainly the team defensive structure have been able to do some marvelous work. The power play has been phenomenal. And we saw at times that the 5v5 offense would occasionally have some really strong games, but it's not consistent enough to look at this team as a top 5 squad in the NHL. And that's where I have this disconnect with how the Jets have developed their youth. They have all these prospects that could potentially play NHL minutes, and yet we don't really see much of them. Last year was the first time in a couple of years where we've had more than one Jets prospect actually get NHL minutes in the season, and not just like fourth line guys that you don't really think about, but legitimately middle 6 to top 6 options in guys like Lambert and, of course, Chibrikov. And so, my hope is that this year Winnipeg actually gives more opportunities for competition and involvement from the youth. The Jets have for too long kind of postponed the transition season. They've really not been using a lot of their youth, and certainly they've ended up trading a couple of them who got disgruntled or didn't feel like they fit in. Some players have just been straight up waived to keep guys like Logan Stanley. And, you watch Chisholm and Kovacevic go elsewhere and do really well. And it's like, what is Winnipeg doing here, right? What is their pipeline plan? Why are they making these decisions? And how can we get back to the basics and go to what the Jets were really good at years ago, which was drafting and developing? They need to adopt this model again. They really need to actually give the youth a chance to compete. And they can't just say that, the youth aren't good enough right now. Of course they're not going to be, right? It's very rare that young players in the NHL hit the ground running immediately. And so you have to give them space and time to fail and try to improve. If they don't improve over, several weeks worth of play, have the conversation of sending them back down. But I think Winnipeg is at this point in their like timeline and really this competitive window where we already know what they're capable of in terms of the playoffs. The regular season, they've mastered that too. They've gotten about as far as you can possibly get. It's the playoffs that continue to be the real sore spot. And you need more than 1 or 2 rookies to actually make the team. If they try this and it doesn't work, then so be it, right? They tried it. They found out it wasn't enough and it didn't get the team over the hump. But Winnipeg has limited itself from even finding this out for the past several years. And yeah, I see the argument from a lot of fans, like the coaches know what they're doing. The front office knows what they're doing. It's a winning organization. And it is in the regular season. But when it comes to the playoffs, there is still a track record of improvement needed. And that's where I really hope that this year the youth are actually given a chance, right? This is going to be one of those seasons where if Lambert or Chibrikov only plays a couple of games, or both of them only play a couple of games this season, that to me is a failure. This org has to start moving ahead and look towards the future. And I think it can involve part of this current core. Hellebuck and Scheifele and guys like that, I think, can absolutely be part of the next group. But until the Jets actually give the youth a chance to assert themselves in this lineup, to see if they can actually become something, of an NHL contributor and help out the depth portions of this team, Winnipeg's going to be stuck trying to find a lot of stopgap solutions. And that's not how you want to spend the next 3 years. If this is your competitive window, you need to give the kids the room to breathe. And if they do and they really start to run with it, awesome. If they don't, you can go back to what you usually do and try to find the stopgaps, and maybe something will emerge out of that. But I think as it is, Winnipeg has already limited its own ceiling, and if they don't actually allow the youth to do something this year, it just feels like it's never coming, right? It'll be one of those scenarios where you run into a New York Islander sort of situation, and the Jets are going to be spinning their wheels. I hope beyond all hope that is not what happens to this team and that the Jets get aggressive, because I think this is where the opportunity for them to really move this core forward is absolutely wide open. It's a fantastic season to do a bit of a retool, and I hope that they take advantage, because if they don't, it just feels like Winnipeg missed another big opportunity to put themselves in a better playoff spot. But curious to know how you feel about this. Do you agree that the youth need to be given more of a chance? What do you think is going to happen this year? Do you think Lambert or Jibrikov play more than 10 games? Drop your comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Before we close out tonight, did want to chat a little bit about the season storylines and kind of talk about some of the big thought processes ahead of the season as we come into really the start of the year, just coming up in a couple of weeks. Before we do, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. Whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments, when you don't have the full picture, you could be leaving tons of money on the table. That's why Monarch Money is here to help. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch Money is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch Money can help you with data visualization. They can help you link your accounts, get clear and smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. If you have a partner or spouse, they also have shared accounts that let you set goals together and always stay on the same financial page. It's a great platform. It's convenient. Again, it's all in one spot. And maybe you find that you're actually spending more money on streaming services than you realized. Monarch Money can help you narrow down those cost-cutting measures and help you figure out what's the best way to meet your financial objectives for the future and the upcoming year. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's closing thoughts, as I just wanted to spend a couple of brief minutes talking about this year's bigger storylines at a very high level. We'll probably dive into them in upcoming episodes in more detail, but I just wanted to talk about the high-level stuff. I think the first thing that this year is certainly talking about in terms of the Jets' performance and what we see out of this team is really the shift towards an older roster. This year's team is one of the oldest teams in the NHL, and I think that that's going to have a real impact when it comes to the playoffs. Maybe we don't see it in the regular season, but come the playoff time, if the Jets still have a very similar team composition to what they do on paper right now, I think it's going to be a real problem. Speed's going to be an issue. Age is going to be a factor. Offensive production is going to be an issue. This team might not have a particularly deep run if Hellebuck and the defensive structure can't carry the squad. If that's not going to happen, Winnipeg's going to be in some real trouble. I don't think that they have the horses right now to go toe-to-toe with top teams like Colorado and Dallas. And even Dallas has had its own flaws, right? The Stars are not exactly some invincible juggernaut. They got humbled by the Oilers. And, this offseason hasn't really inspired a lot of confidence in them, but they still dealt with the Jets with some of their big acquisitions. So I can't talk too much trash about them because they kind of beat the Jets down pretty decently. Maybe they didn't win every 5v5 battle, but in the moments that counted most, their trade deadline acquisitions made the difference. I think the second storyline that I'm also wondering about is how much the youth play. I just talked about expectations for them this year, and I think they have to play more than 10 games. You can't have your rookies not being involved in this team. This year's squad is not that great on paper. I don't look at this team and see, a top-end contender. I see a lot of veterans who are going to do their best to try and keep this, this window open, but this year does not feel like one where the Jets right now, as it is, are super invested in it. I think if they have a good opportunity to make a big trade acquisition, they'll make a play for that. But until then, we are sitting at, a reasonable, probably top 3 to 4 Central Division team, but not one that goes much beyond that. And that, I think, is hard coming off of such a good President's Trophy season where it felt like the world was just sitting in front of the Jets to take, and they only half grasped it. The last thing that I sort of look into, the crystal ball for here is this Jonathan Taves signing, right? The Taves deal, I think, is really the big black box and X factor of maybe this whole season. We have no idea what Taves is going to be like. Revenue-wise, he's already going to sell loads and loads of jerseys. Zero question about that. The stores haven't been able to keep them in stock. The team has to be loving the marketing aspect. But when it comes to the on-ice performance, do any of us really believe that he's going to be a top 6 guy? I would love to see it. I think it would be awesome if it happened, but I am expecting him to be maybe a 4th-line center. And if that's the best that he can do, so be it. But if the Jets don't recognize that in time, we are in a really tough spot. Winnipeg's center depth right now is not great. Lowry is still sidelined. We don't know when he's coming back. And, unless the Jets are willing to give players like maybe David Gustafsson or Cole Perfetti or some of these other young talents more room to breathe in a middle 6 center role, I just don't see where the Jets find help down the middle. It's not coming from internally. And so, if the Jets don't make trades, what else are they going to do? A lot of pressure is kind of sitting on Taves to really be the leader here. And if he's just not physically able to keep up and he's not really ready for it, I don't know how Winnipeg gets around this. He's an okay stopgap until Lowry's healthy, but if he has to do more than that, and if the team expects more than that, I don't know how the Jets play this. I feel like, this whole offseason has been making a lot of really big gambles and bets on some very small signings that to me just don't move the needle. And so I wonder, what is the plan for the season? If we look at this team and we see, what the Jets are trying to pull together, do they really feel like this is a competitive team? Is this what they want heading into the start of the season? I doubt it. I think that they wanted more, and I'm sure that they were trying for stuff. But until we really see them deliver something concrete here, it just feels like Winnipeg is setting itself up for a short playoff run. That's been the story for the last several years. The past season, they finally started to change the narrative a bit, and now it feels like they're going backwards again. So I don't know. I think, in some ways I'm disappointed and frustrated. In other ways, I'm not really surprised. It is what it is. And there's only so much that I can tell you about this until we see the season actually start and see this team play. But I do have a strong feeling that if it gets to the playoffs again, and this team is looking like it does right now, it's not going to be a deep run. And the Jets need help, right? Winnipeg needs help. They need more talent. And there are only a couple of ways to do it. If you don't want to tank, then you'd better make use of those trade assets you have and try and find some help, because it's not going to just magically appear in front of you or from your system, barring a miracle. So a lot of work to get done. Some big questions for the Jets. Let me know your thoughts about the upcoming season and the biggest storylines you want to talk about in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow night for the conclusion of this week's episodes before we finally go back to a daily schedule. As always, have a great night and go Jets go.